Hey parents, have you ever watched your child do something that just made you scratch your head and wonder what on earth is going on in their little mind? Maybe your 3-year-old insists on wearing the same shirt every single day, even when it's dirty. Maybe your 5-year-old has imaginary conversations with their stuffed animals that seem incredibly intense and serious. Or perhaps your 7-year-old has developed this weird ritual where they have to touch every door frame before walking through it. Most of us, when we see these behaviors, we might think our kids are just being quirky, or maybe we worry that something's wrong. But Donald Winnicott, the brilliant child psychologist who revolutionized how we understand children, saw something completely different. He discovered that these seemingly odd behaviors aren't random at all. In fact, they're often incredibly meaningful expressions of your child's inner world, and they serve purposes that are much deeper and more important than we might imagine. Winnicott spent his entire career observing children and trying to understand what they were really communicating through their behaviors. What he found was absolutely fascinating. He realized that children are constantly working through complex emotional and psychological processes, but they don't do it the way adults do. They don't sit down and analyze their feelings or talk through their problems. Instead, they use their behavior, their play, their rituals, and their relationships to process their experiences and make sense of their world. Let me give you an example that might sound familiar. There's a little girl who suddenly becomes obsessed with organizing her toys in very specific ways. Every stuffed animal has to be in exactly the right position, and if anyone moves them, she becomes incredibly upset. Her parents might see this as unnecessary rigidity, or maybe even worry about obsessive-compulsive tendencies. But Winnicott would look at this behavior and ask a different question. What is this child trying to control? And why does she need that control right now? Maybe this little girl recently started at a new daycare where everything feels unpredictable and scary. Maybe there's been tension at home that she's picking up on but can't understand. Maybe she's going through a developmental leap that's making her feel uncertain about herself. Her need to organize her toys isn't about the toys at all. It's about creating a small world where she has complete control, where everything feels safe and predictable. It's her way of managing anxiety and restoring a sense of order when other parts of her life feel chaotic. This is what Winnicott meant when he talked about children's behaviors having symbolic meaning. Your child isn't just playing or acting randomly. They're unconsciously working through their deepest feelings and experiences through their actions. And here's the beautiful part. When we can understand what they're really trying to communicate, we can respond in ways that actually help them heal and grow. Let's talk about another common behavior that often puzzles parents: repetitive play. Maybe your child wants to read the same book 50 times in a row, or they insist on playing the same pretend game over and over again. From an adult perspective, this can feel boring or even concerning. We might think our child isn't being creative or that they're stuck somehow. But Winnicott understood that repetitive play serves a crucial function for children. When a child repeats something over and over, they're often trying to master an experience that felt overwhelming or confusing. Maybe the story they want to hear repeatedly is about a character who overcomes a challenge, and your child needs to hear that message of resilience again and again until they really believe it's possible for them to or think about how children ought to play the same games after experiencing something difficult. A child who had a scary experience at the doctor might come home and spend hours playing doctor with their dolls, taking turns being the patient and the doctor. Through this repetitive play, they're transforming from being the powerless victim of a scary experience into someone who has control and understanding. They're healing themselves through play. This is why Winnicott always emphasized the importance of not rushing to change or stop these behaviors. When we understand that our child is working through something important, we can be patient and supportive. Instead of worried or frustrated, we can trust that their inner wisdom knows what they need to do to process their experiences. Now, let's talk about some behaviors that really tend to worry parents. Things like talking to imaginary friends, having very specific rituals, or seeming to live in their own world. I remember working with parents who were concerned because their 4-year-old had developed this elaborate bedtime routine that took forever and seemed to involve checking under the bed multiple times, arranging stuffed animals in a very particular way, and saying goodnight to various objects in the room. From Winnicott's perspective, this child wasn't being difficult or obsessive. They were creating what he called a transitional space, a bridge between the day world and the night world, between being awake and being asleep, between having parents nearby and being alone in their room. All of those rituals were helping them feel safe enough to let go and fall asleep. Winnicott discovered that children naturally create these transitional spaces and transitional objects to help them navigate the challenging parts of growing up. That special blanket your child can't sleep without? That's not just a comfort object. It's a transitional object that represents your love and care, even when you're not physically present. It helps them practice being independent while still feeling connected to you. Here's something else, Winnicott. Notice that's really important for parents to understand. Children's odd behaviors often emerge during times of transition or stress. Maybe you've moved to a new house, or there's been a change in your family structure, or your child is starting school. During these times, children might develop new behaviors that seem strange or concerning. But these behaviors are actually signs of your child's resilience and creativity. They're showing you that they're trying to adapt and cope with changes that feel big and overwhelming to them. Instead of seeing these behaviors as problems to fix, Winnicott would encourage us to see them as evidence of our child's inner strength and their natural drive to heal and grow. I want to share a story that really illustrates this beautifully. There was a little boy who started kindergarten and suddenly began collecting rocks. Not just any rocks, very specific rocks that he would find on the playground. He would fill his pockets with them and bring them home, and his room became full of these rocks arranged in careful patterns. His parents were puzzled and a little concerned. Was this normal? Should they limit how many rocks he could bring home? But when they looked at this behavior through Winnicott's lens, they realized something beautiful was happening. This little boy was feeling overwhelmed by the big new world of school, with all its rules and expectations and social complexities. The rocks became his way of bringing a piece of that overwhelming world home where he felt safe. He could control these rocks, arrange them however he wanted, and they became a bridge between his secure home environment and the challenging school environment. After a few months, as he became more comfortable at school, his interest in the rocks naturally faded. He no longer needed that transitional support. This brings up an important point about timing. Winnicott believed that most of these transitional behaviors and odd habits naturally resolve themselves when the child no longer needs them. If we can resist the urge to interfere or force changes, our children will usually move through these phases on their own timeline. But here's where it gets tricky for parents. Sometimes these behaviors can be inconvenient or embarrassing. Maybe your child insists on wearing their superhero costume to the grocery store every single time. Maybe they talk to their imaginary friend during family dinners. Maybe they have a specific way of doing things that slows down your morning routine. Winnicott would remind us that our child's emotional development is more important than our convenience or what other people might think. When we can support and accept these behaviors instead of fighting them, we're sending our child a powerful message that all parts of them are acceptable, even the parts that seem strange or difficult. Of course, there are times when we need to set some boundaries. If a behavior is dangerous or truly disruptive to family life, we can work with our child to find compromises. But the key is to approach these conversations with curiosity and respect for what the behavior might be serving, rather than just trying to make it stop. Let me talk about another common behavior that often worries parents when children seem to regress or go backwards in their development. Maybe your potty-trained 4-year-old suddenly starts having accidents again. Maybe your independent 5-year-old suddenly becomes clingy and wants to be carried everywhere. From a typical perspective, we might see this as a problem or a setback. But Winnicott understood that regression is often a natural and healthy response to stress or change. When children feel overwhelmed, they sometimes need to go back to an earlier stage where they felt safer and more secure. It's their way of gathering strength before moving forward again. Instead of panicking or pushing them to act their age, Winnicott would encourage us to see regression as communication. Your child is telling you that they need extra support and comfort right now. They need to feel like that secure baby or toddler for a little, while before they're ready to take on the challenges of being bigger. Here's something else that's really important to understand about children's odd behaviors. They often serve a protective function. Maybe your child has developed a habit of asking the same question over and over again, even though you've answered it multiple times. This might seem annoying or like they're not listening, but it could be their way of seeking reassurance about something that feels uncertain or scary. Or maybe your child has become very particular about how things are done. They want their sandwich cut in triangles, not squares, and they want their clothes laid out in a specific way. This isn't them being difficult. It's them creating predictability and control in a world that often feels unpredictable and overwhelming. Winnicott taught us to look beyond the surface behavior and try to understand the emotional need underneath. When we can respond to that underlying need, the problematic behavior often resolves naturally. Now, I know some parents worry that if they accommodate these odd behaviors, they're somehow enabling their child or preventing them from growing up. But Winnicott's research showed exactly the opposite. Children who feel understood and supported in their developmental processes actually become more resilient and confident over time. When we fight against our child's natural coping mechanisms, we often create more problems than we solve. But when we can trust their inner wisdom and support their process, we help them develop a strong sense of self and the ability to navigate challenges throughout their life. The key is learning to distinguish between behaviors that are part of normal development and behaviors that might indicate a child needs professional support. Most odd behaviors in childhood are temporary and serve important developmental functions. But if behaviors persist for a very long time, interfere significantly with daily functioning, or seem to cause your child distress, it might be worth consulting with a professional who understands child development. Remember, your child is constantly growing and changing, and their behaviors are one of the primary ways they communicate with us about their inner experience. When we can see their odd behaviors as windows into their world, rather than problems to fix, we become better partners in their development. So the next time your child does something that seems strange or puzzling, take a moment to wonder what they might be working through. What might this behavior be helping them with? What need might it be serving? When we approach our children's behaviors with this kind of curiosity and respect, we often discover that they're much wiser and more resilient than we ever imagined.